So I'm going to go over some of the review problems that I posted in the exam one material folder to help you kind of prepare a little bit better for exam number one. So this is the first document. I believe it's entitled exam one review problems. So let's go through it. So this one's going to be looking at multi-market analysis. We'll have some multiple shifts and also some movements and shifts. So question number one says, suppose you're analyzing the market for iPhones and iPhone cases. Assume that there's a shortage of iPhones and show the impact on both markets. So this is going to be an example of those multi-market analysis. So we're going to have two separate markets. We have our market for the iPhones and we also have our market for the cases. Now, according to our scenario here, we see that there's a shortage of iPhones. Now, anytime there's a shortage, that means that the market is not at equilibrium. Now, in our notes, we said that a shortage occurs when quantity demanded exceeds quantity supplied. Now, typically, in order to fix a shortage, you have to increase the price. So, anytime there's a shortage, that means that the market price is set too low. So, let's say we have our market price set down here. So that's going to show a shortage. Because once again, we see that quantity demanded, which would be represented right here. Let's throw an arbitrary number, let's say 500, is greater than our quantity supplied, which would be represented right here. So we have a shortage. Alright, so that's our first half of this graph. So we're showing a shortage and then what's going to happen in both markets. Now, as I mentioned already, in order to fix a shortage, firms will increase the price. So in order to fix a shortage, firms are going to increase the price. Now, according to our law of demand, we know that anytime that price goes up, quantity demanded is going to go down. So this is going to be a movement along our demand curve. Alright, so anytime price goes up, we know quantity demand is going to go down. Now also, according to our law of supply, anytime the price goes up, quantity supplied is going to increase as well. So that would be a movement right here along our supply curve. Now the price will continue to increase until we eventually get to our equilibrium point right here. Because we know that when the market's in equilibrium, quantity demand is equal to quantity supplied, so there's no surpluses and no shortages. So in the market for iPhones, we see that the price is going to go up. Now, how is that price increase going to affect the market for iPhone cases? Now, we're going to understand that these are going to be complements. So anytime the price of a complement goes up, if iPhones become more expensive, consumers are not going to buy as many iPhones as they previously were. And that's going to impact the demand for iPhone cases. Because if people aren't buying iPhones, then they really don't need those cases to kind of go along with those iPhones. So we're going to have a decrease in demand. Now, anytime there's a decrease in demand, that means that there's going to be a leftward shift of our demand curve. A leftward shift of our demand curve. Now, we'll find our new equilibrium price and quantity where our new demand curve intersects our existing supply curve. So let's call this P2 and Q2. Now, as a result, we see that our equilibrium price has gone down. So cases are becoming cheaper. And our equilibrium quantity has decreased as well. So this is an example of those multi-market analysis, seeing how changes in one market affects another market. Let's look at the second one. So we see that pizza and breadsticks are complementary goods. So if the government levies additional taxes on pizza suppliers, show the impact on both markets. So we have our market for pizzas and a market for breadsticks. Now, in the market for pizzas, we see that the government is going to place additional taxes. Anything that increases cost for the firm is going to decrease the supply. Now, our decrease in supply is going to be shown as a leftward shift of our supply curve. And we'll find our new equilibrium point where that new supply curve intersects our existing demand curve, which would be, once again, right here. So we have our new price, we'll call that P2, and we have our new quantity, which we'll refer to as Q2. So once again, anytime there's an increase in taxes, that is going to lead to a decrease in supply. Now, as a result, let's look at what happened to our equilibrium price. If this is our origin right here where it's 0, 0, the further you go away from 0, the higher the price is going. And then the closer we get to 0, the lower our quantity is going. So that decrease in supply is going to lead to our equilibrium price going up and our equilibrium quantity going down. So that's what's going to happen in our market for pizzas. But let's look at what's going to happen in the market for breadsticks as pizzas now become more expensive. So similar to what we just did in this table above, we see that the price of a complementary good is increasing. If I can get my arrow correct. Alright, so whenever the price of a complementary good goes up, that's going to lead to a decrease in demand, which once again is going to be at leftward shift of our demand curve. As we find our new equilibrium point, we can make our prediction for what's going to happen to our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity. So when demand goes down, as we saw above, that means that our equilibrium price is going to decrease and our equilibrium quantity is going to decrease as well. Now this question, so letter C says, assume that you're analyzing the U.S. market for healthcare. Show the impact if the government subsidizes the firms providing healthcare. So we have the government subsidizing firms providing healthcare. And then we also see that the U.S. income levels decrease. So the income levels are going down. And we're going to assume that healthcare is going to be considered a normal good. So as I talked about in the notes, the best way to answer something like this is to separate the impacts. So we're in the market for healthcare, but we'll see that each of these scenarios one will affect the demand side of the market and the other is going to affect the supply side. So as we isolate the impacts to make an accurate prediction, let's start with our supply side. So the government subsidizing healthcare. Now, anytime you receive a subsidy, that's you're getting money from the government that you don't have to pay back, that you can use to put towards your production. So that's essentially like free money, which is going to allow firms to be able to produce more. So there's going to be an increase in supply, which will be a rightward shift of our supply curve. We find our equilibrium price and quantity. That'll be P2 and Q2. So on the supply side, we see that our price is going down and our quantity is going up. Now on the demand side, when we see that U.S. income levels are decreasing, and if we're assuming that healthcare is a normal good, when incomes go down for a normal good, demand also goes down. So that's going to be a leftward shift of our demand curve. Find our new equilibrium price and quantity, P2, Q2. So on the demand side, we see prices going down and quantity is going down. Now, as we look at the instructions, it's asking us to indicate an overall prediction for our equilibrium price and our equilibrium quantity in this market for healthcare. Now, we can say for sure that the price is going to go down because on the supply side, the government subsidizing healthcare is causing the equilibrium price to go down. And then also with the income levels decreasing on the demand side, we see that price is going to go down. However, when we look at what's going to happen to our quantity here, we see it's going in opposite directions. The supply side impact is having our quantity increase while the demand side impact is having our quantity decrease. So we actually don't know what's going to happen to the quantity at this point. We don't have enough information. We don't know which one's going to have the bigger impact, the government subsidizing the healthcare or with the income levels decreasing. So we can say that quantity is indeterminate or unknown. So we just don't have enough information. All right, so this next one we're looking at the market for Propel water. We're in the market for Propel water. So answer each question with the letters corresponding to the following answer choices. I can pretty much guarantee you're going to see a table just like this on your exam, and I'll show you the best way to answer this one. What I like to do is separate because I see students constantly confuse changes in quantity demanded and demand or changes in quantity supplied with supply. So the best thing to do is to separate the two impacts. Now we have our law of demand and our law of supply. So let's look at what happens when price goes up and when price goes down. So anytime the price goes up, according to our law of demand, quantity demanded is going to go down because consumers have this inverse or this negative relationship between the price and the quantity demanded. And anytime the price goes down, according to our law of demand, quantity demand goes up as consumers want to buy more as the price becomes cheaper. Now, according to our law of supply, as price goes up, quantity supplied increases as firms want to make more units available at higher prices. And if the price were to go down, quantity supplied is going to go down as well. So anytime price goes up, that means that quantity demand is going to go down and quantity supplied is going to go up. Anytime the price goes down, quantity demand is going to go up and quantity supplied is going to go down. So if we're in the market for Propel water here, the first thing that I would do if I had a table like this is I'm looking for the two scenarios where price is either going up or if the price is going down. So letter A here says the price of Propel water goes down or decreases. As price decreases, as we saw above, we know that quantity demand is going to go up. So that's A. And quantity supplied is going to go down. That's F. So we saw where prices, the Propel water is going down. So let's find the other scenario, which is right here with C. The price of Propel water increases. So as price goes up for Propel, we're going to see that quantity demand is going to go down and quantity supplied is going to go up. Now, after I answer those two scenarios, because the price can only go up or it can go down, then you will never use quantity demand or quantity supplied again. So what I actually do is I just block out these. That wasn't very effective, so let me see if I can block these out because you're never going to use them again. Now it will be a little bit easier just deciding if the scenario is going to impact demand or impact supply. and then going from there to see if it's going to increase or decrease. So let's look at B. It says that the Illinois minimum wage decreases, so Propel has to pay their employees less. Now, if Propel's paying their employees less, that's going to allow them to be able to produce more. So we're going to see G, an increase in supply. So as I mentioned before, anything that decreases cost for the firm is going to allow supply to increase. Letter D here. Famous athletes all over advertise that Propel water is the best. Well, if you see your favorite athlete advertising that they drink Propel water to stay hydrated and that helps them with their performance, we can expect that there's going to be an increase in demand. So this is going to be C here, an increase in demand. So anytime a good becomes more popular, we see that that leads to an increase in demand. The local government decreases corporate taxes on all providers of water. So if there's a decrease in taxes, Propel's going to have a lot more money left over to put back into production of their water, which will lead to an increase in supply. So G, increase in supply. Average incomes decrease, and we see that Propel is considered to be a normal good. As incomes go down with normal goods, we know that demand is going to go down as well. Letter G, vitamin water, a competing service, decreases. So anytime that the price of a substitute goes down and consumers view both, let's say, vitamin water and Propel as complete substitutes, if vitamin water becomes cheaper, we're going to see that there's going to be a decrease in demand for Propel water. So that will be D, as people start to go buy vitamin water. And then the government subsidizes Propel. As I mentioned before, a subsidy is essentially just free money that you don't have to pay back. So if the government is subsidizing Propel, that's going to allow them to produce more, which would be G here, increase in supply. All right. All right, so for the next question, we have information for our price, quantity, demand, and quantity supplied. So it says sketch the market indicating the reservation price, the minimum selling price, and our equilibrium price. So we always have price on our vertical axis, quantity on our horizontal. Now the reservation price is going to be the highest amount that consumers are willing and able to pay for a good. So the reservation price is always going to be able to be identified because it's the price when quantity demanded is equal to 0. So that's going to be our y-intercept. So that's right here. See, when quantity demand is 0, price is 50. So that's how we're going to have our demand curve. So it's going to start from that y-intercept, or that 50, that reservation price. And then we'll also have our supply curve tell us where to start by looking at our minimum selling price. The minimum selling price is going to be the lowest amount that firms need in order to start production. So this is going to be the price when quantity supplied is equal to 0, which is 30. So this is our supply curve. And then we can find our equilibrium price and quantity, because your equilibrium occurs when quantity demand is equal to quantity supplied. So our equilibrium price is 35 and our equilibrium quantity is 600. So this isn't a scale at all, but that's how we would construct it. So B, it says if the government decides to impose a price floor at $45, then what will happen? So a price floor means that the price cannot go below this amount. So if it's at $45, we have our price floor. Now, according to our table here, we know that if the price was $45, consumers, or the quantity supplied, would be 1,800, and our quantity demanded would be 200. So if quantity demanded is 200 and quantity supplied is equal to 1800, we have a surplus. Surpluses always occur when quantity supplied exceeds quantity demanded, and in this case we have a surplus of 1600 units. So it's just the difference between the two. So 1800 minus 200 is going to give us 1600. So then the next question asks, is this price floor efficient? Why or why not? Now we see that it's not going to be efficient. And the reason why is because these price floors lead to persistent surpluses. If it's illegal for the price to go below this $45 here, we see that this market's not going to be able to get to its equilibrium point of $35. By preventing the market price from lowering, you're going to keep that surplus intact, so the market's not going to be able to adjust itself back to equilibrium. So that's the first assignment. Let's look really briefly at some of these for the second one. So this is looking at changes in market equilibrium. Changes in market equilibrium. So it says assume that Coke and Pepsi are substitutes. So we have the market for Coca-Cola, and we're going to have the market for Pepsi. Alright, so we have our price and our quantities. Price, quantity. So it says that Coke is able to purchase corn syrup at a lower price due to contract renegotiations with the supplier. So we know that corn syrup is going to be an input in the production of of Coke. So as the price of an input goes down, well, first let's draw our equilibrium point out. So as a result, we see that as the price of an input goes down, our supply is going to increase. So increase in supply is always going to be a rightward shift of our supply curve. We'll find our new equilibrium point to try to make our prediction for what's going to happen to the price and quantity. So P2 and Q2. And we see that as a result, price goes down, quantity goes up. Now, let's look at how that impacts the market for Pepsi over here. So if this market started off in equilibrium, once again P1 and Q1, and we see that now the price of Coca-Cola is going down. Now, if Coke and Pepsi are substitutes, since the price of Coca-Cola decrease, so the price of a substitute decrease, that's going to lead to a decrease in demand for Pepsi. Decrease in demand is going to be a leftward shift of our demand curve. Find our new equilibrium point. So P2 and Q2. As a result, we see that our equilibrium price goes down and our equilibrium quantity goes down as well. So once again, just another example of those multi-market analysis similar to what we did on this first assignment with the pizza and the breadsticks. So letter B is similar, so I'll kind of skip over that. And part C here, where we're looking at the market for apples and the market for apple juice, and we see that there's a shortage, that's going to be pretty much the same as 1A here, where we have the iPhones and the cases where it started off as a shortage. So let's go through it really quick. If we have the market for apples, have the market for apple juice. So in the market for apples, we see that there's currently a shortage. Now, anytime there's a shortage, as we mentioned before, that means that the market is not at equilibrium. So the market price is set somewhere below the equilibrium if there's a shortage. Because we see that quantity demand is going to be greater than our quantity supplied. So let's just throw some numbers in here, 200 and 700. So currently in the market for apples, there's a shortage of 500 units. Now, in order to fix that shortage, price is going to go up. And as we saw before, when the price goes up, according to our law of demand, quantity demanded goes down. And according to our law of supply, we're going to see that quantity supplied is going to go up. Now, since apples are considered an input for apple juice, anytime the price of an input goes up, that's going to cause supply to decrease. So a decrease in supply, first let me show my equilibrium point. So this decrease in supply is going to be a leftward shift of our supply curve. We find our new equilibrium point. Our new equilibrium point, it's going to be right here where our new supply curve intersects our existing demand curve. And we see as a result, price is going up. And our quantity has gone down. So let's skip over that one. And let's look at some of the consumer surplus and producer surplus. So consumer surplus is going to be the benefit that consumers receive from participating in a market. It's going to be the difference between what they actually pay and what they are willing to pay. And we'll have our producer surplus, which is going to be the difference between what the firm is willing to accept and what they actually receive. So what they'd be willing to accept in the market price. So let's shade in the area that represents consumer surplus in this market. So as I mentioned, consumer surplus is always going to be the difference between what consumers are willing to pay, which is represented by the demand curve, and what they actually pay, which is represented by the market price. So in this example here, the market's in equilibrium at $30. So your consumer surplus is always going to be the area below the demand curve and above the market price. Now for producer surplus, it's going to be the area above the supply curve because it represents the difference between what firms are willing to accept and what they actually receive. So it will be above the supply curve and below the market price. So this is our producer surplus. And I guess I kind of answered A and B here. So once again, the consumer surplus is going to be that difference between what the consumers are willing to pay and what they actually pay. And for the producer surplus is going to be the difference between what the firm is willing to accept and what they actually receive. Now, in calculating consumer surplus and producer surplus, we're going to use that formula for the area of a triangle. So our consumer surplus is going to be equal to that formula, which is half the base times the height. I'll use the bottom of the triangle here as the base. So that's going from 0 to 500, so equals half of 500. And the height of the consumer surplus is going from the 60 to the 30. So that would be 30. So half of 500 times 30 is going to be equal to 7,500. So our consumer surplus is equal to 7,500. Now producer surplus, we'll start it off the same way using that same formula, half base times height. So half the base times height. We see that the base is the same, so this time I'm just using this part for the base up here. So 0 to 500, so half of 500. And our height goes from $30 here down to 20, so that's a difference of 10. So half of 500 times 10 is going to give me 2,500. So our producer surplus is equal to $2,500. So suppose that the government implements a price floor at the price of $40. Show this on your graph above. So if the price floor is implemented at $40, that means that the price can't go below this amount. So let's add that in at $40. We have our price floor. Alright, so as a result, what is quantity demand and quantity supplied? So to find this out, let's start with quantity demand. So if the price is $40, where does that hit our demand curve? Well, it hits our demand curve right here. And we see that corresponding quantity is going to be 200. So quantity demand is going to be equal to 200. And our quantity supplied at $40, it hits our supply curve right here. We see that corresponding quantity is going to be 800. So the question says, is this efficient? And the answer would be no. And the reason why is because we see that our market's not in equilibrium. So there's this huge surplus of digital photo frames here that the firm is not able to get rid of because they can't lower the price to get back to the equilibrium point. So anytime you're unable to lower the price to get back to that equilibrium, we're going to see that this surplus that we have here is going to continue to persist. So it's not efficient because we see that the surplus is going to persist. Now, this last part of the question, who actually benefits from this price floor, we can say that producers benefit since they're receiving more for each unit that they sell. Previously, they were receiving $30 when our market was in equilibrium. Now they're receiving $40, even though they're selling less units. So we can say, in a way, that producers are benefiting a little bit. So that's how you would answer that part. Now, C here is asking us to shade in the new consumer surplus and the new producer surplus. Now, in order to identify that, we need to first go back up to part B and see how many units are actually going to be sold in the market. Now, consumers want to buy 200 units and the firm wants to make available 800 units. We'll see that only 200 units are going to be sold. Firms are unable to make consumers buy a good that they don't want. So since consumers are only going to purchase 200 units, we know that our consumer surplus and our producer surplus is not going to go past this vertical line here at $200. So now that we've established that, let's go and find our consumer surplus and our producer surplus. Now we said that consumer surplus is going to be the area below the demand curve and above the market price. Now the market price is $40. And remember, it's not going past this $200. So this area right here represents our consumer surplus with this price floor being implemented in the market. Now our producer surplus is going to be the area above the supply curve and below the market price. Above the supply curve and below the market price. But once again, we're not going past this 200 units. So this area represents our producer surplus. And then we have to identify our dead weight loss. Now, the dead weight loss is going to be this reduction in total surplus resulting from the market not being in equilibrium. So that's this little triangle right here, dead weight loss. So once again, it's going to be this reduction in total surplus resulting from the market not being in equilibrium. Because remember, previously we were selling 500 units here. Now we're only selling 200 units. So that's 300 less units than we were previously providing, which is no longer providing any consumers with any surplus, and it's no longer providing any producers with surplus. So that's why we call it dead weight loss. All right, and then let's go through a couple of these questions from the review packet that I posted. So which of the following is an example of capital as a term used by economists? So as we talked about the factors of production, we have those categories: land, labor, and capital. Land is going to be anything that's naturally occurring that could be used in the production process. Labor is anything that men or women contribute to the production process. And then your capital is going to be anything that's used repeatedly in the production process. So in our example here, it's going to be, the stoves and other food preparation equipment used in a restaurant. So once again, that's going to be anything that can be used repeatedly in the production process, like your stove or the other equipment. The minerals and other resources is going to be land, fall under the land category. Money is not considered a resource. Stocks and bonds owned by businesses and individuals are not resources. And the manager who runs the company would fall under the labor category. Which of the following indicates an optimal allocation of resources? Now, we said that anytime marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost, that means that you should do more, so that's not optimal. Anytime marginal benefit is less than the marginal cost, that means do less. But only when we get to our marginal benefit being equal to our marginal cost do we reach that optimal level. Because if we produce past that point, we'll see that marginal benefits will start to go down as marginal costs go up. So remember, optimal is always going to occur where marginal benefit is equal to your marginal cost. If the coming winter is more rainy than usual, what will we see? Well, if we're looking at the markets for umbrellas, we will see that the demand for those umbrellas should increase. Now, anytime demand goes up, that means that the demand curve is going to shift to the right. So A here, if it shifts to the left, that will show a decrease in the demand for umbrellas. The price for umbrellas to go up because there's a movement along the demand curve. Well, it won't be a movement because we're going to have this increase in demand as consumers need more umbrellas. So that first part is right, that the price is going to go up, but it's not a movement along the existing demand curve. We're establishing an entirely new demand curve. And then it wouldn't be a decrease in the quantity of umbrellas sold because more people are going to need it since it's raining more. So which of the following will cause a decrease in the supply of cereal? So we can eliminate A because price causes changes in the quantity supplied. An improvement in technology will allow supply to go up. So that will be an increase in supply. And we can say a drought that destroys 5% of the grain harvest. Yep, that's something that would negatively impact the supply of cereal. So a decrease in the price of tractors, which are used in the cultivation of grain, would increase the production, so that would increase supply as well. So C is going to be the correct answer. So question number 5. The American Association of Health determines that coffee is good for your health and coffee becomes more popular. We expect to observe that in the market for coffee, there's going to be what? So if coffee is good for your health, that's going to cause demand to go up. So if we have our market here and let's say that our equilibrium price was $5 and quantity was 100. Anytime there's an increase in demand, so a rightward shift, we can expect our quantity to go up and our price to go up. So A here, an increase in equilibrium price and quantity. Apples and oranges are substitute goods. A freeze in Florida destroys a good portion of the orange crop. All else being held constant, what is going to happen? So if apples and oranges are substitutes and a freeze in Florida destroys a good portion of the orange crop, we can see that there's going to be a decrease in the supply of oranges. Now as the supply of oranges go down, that means that the price is going to go up in the market for oranges and the quantity is going to go down in the market for oranges. So let's look at our scenarios. So a decrease in the supply of oranges. Now as oranges become more expensive due to the price going up, and if apples and oranges are substitutes, we're going to see an increase in demand for apples. Because anytime a substitute becomes more expensive, we're going to have an increase in demand for the good that we're in the market for. So for question 6 here, let's see if we can find the answer. There will be a decrease in the quantity supplied. Nope. So it's a decrease in the supply of oranges. There will be a decrease in the supply of oranges and an increase in demand. So B. B here is our answer. If there's a decrease in labor costs within the auto industry, we would expect to see what? We said that anything that decreases cost for the firm is going to increase supply for the firm. So there will be an increase in the supply of cars. Question 8. If price is equal to $50, so 50 minus 0.25 QD and P is equal to 2 plus 0.1 QS, what is our equilibrium price and our quantity? And the market, show graphically the market labeling your equilibrium price and quantity. So in order to find our equilibrium price and quantity, we have to first rearrange these equations to get our demand equation and our supply equation from these inverse demand and supply equations. So P is equal to 50 minus 0.25 QD. First, I want to subtract 50 from both sides, so I have P minus 50 is equal to negative 0.25 QD. Divide both sides by negative 0.25. And as we talked about in the notes, anytime you just have that variable P there, that means that there's an imaginary 1. So 1 divided by 0.25 is, or negative 0.25 is going to give us a negative 4P. And then if we take 50 divided by 0.25, that's going to be 200. So plus 200 is equal to QD. So here's our demand equation. And for our supply equation, we're going to do the same thing. We have P is equal to 2 plus 0.1 QS. Subtract 2 from both sides. We have P minus 2 is equal to 0.1 QS. Then divide both sides by 0.1. Don't forget your imaginary 1 in front of P. So 1 divided by 0.1 is going to give us 10. So we have 10P. And then if we take 2 divided by 0.1, that is going to give us 20. So 10P minus 20 is going to be equal to QS. And we have our supply equation. Now to find our equilibrium price and quantity, we have to set the two equations equal to each other. So we have negative 4P plus 200 is equal to 10P minus 20. So I have 200 is equal to 14P minus 20. We're going to add 20 to both sides. I have 220 is equal to 14P. And then if I take 220 divided by 14, that's going to be 15.71 is equal to our price. So our equilibrium price is 15.71. Now to find your equilibrium quantity, we're just going to plug this price in. You can plug it into either equation, you'll get the same answer. So 10 times 15.71 minus 20 is going to give us 137.1. So that is going to be our equilibrium quantity. Alright, so if a firm wants to sell 100 units, what is the maximum price that they can charge to sell all 100 units? We can start with our supply equation here. Or we can use that inverse supply equation, that would be quicker for us. So P is equal to 2 plus 0.10 QS. And it says that they want to sell 100 units. We just plug that 100 in for quantity supplied here. So P is equal to 2 plus 10. So the price would be $12. All right. So let's move on. I think the formatting is a little messed up on these. So there was other ones that I wanted to touch on. So a lot of these are looking at the equations that we just kind of went over. So looking at the quantitative version of finding our equilibrium price and quantity. I'm trying to see if there was a specific one that I wanted to touch on. Yes, this one. So question number 27 here. So an agricultural price floor is a price that the government guarantees farmers will receive for a particular crop. Suppose the federal government sets a price floor at $12 per bushel. What is the amount of shortage or surplus in the corn market as a result of the price floor? So there's several questions that I will ask from a table like this that shows your demand schedule and your supply schedule together. So first, let's answer this first part. So we see that at the price of $12, that means that there is going to be a surplus of 10,000 units. And the reason why is because we see quantity supplied is 28,000, quantity demand is 18,000. So if the price floor in the next question will be, is this efficient? And we know that it's not going to be efficient because anytime a price floor is implemented, that means that the price can't go below that amount. So if the price can't go below that amount, that means that that surplus is going to persist. Now, even if we kind of flipped it and asked if they set a price ceiling at the price of $6, so a price ceiling at $6, in this case, we would have a shortage because we see that quantity demand is 28,000, whereas quantity supplied is only 8,000. So we would have a shortage of 20,000 units, I should say. And that wouldn't be efficient as well because once again, the price is unable to go up to get to that equilibrium of $10 here. So that shortage at $6 will continue to persist and the market's unable to adjust itself back to equilibrium. So that deals with a lot of the inefficiencies or what we call market failures. Now, speaking of market failures, I wanted to touch base very briefly on some of the information from chapter 5. Now, you won't see as much material from chapter 5 on your exam as you will with the other chapters, But there's some important things that I just wanted you to be able to identify. Now, as I mentioned, market failure. Now, anytime there is market failure, this means that there's this inability of the market to allocate resources efficiently. So there's an inability of the market to allocate resources efficiently. And this is going to be up to the point where the marginal social benefit equals that marginal social cost. Now, as you looked at in chapter 5, we're dealing with a lot of externalities. Now, an externality is going to be a benefit or a cost imposed on a third party. So a cost or benefit imposed on someone who is not the producer or the consumer of the good of a service or of a good or a service. So there could be positive externalities, such as like the flu shot. So if I give the flu shot, that provides me private benefit because it prevents me from getting the flu, but it also provides a social benefit to the point where I'm unable to give the flu to other people. So that will be an example of a positive externality. A negative externality, as the textbook uses over and over, is the concept of pollution. So pollution is a negative externality because there's cost imposed on a third party. So if I live next to a factory that's constantly dumping hazardous chemicals into the water, or a lot of hazardous material going in the air, that can cause my standard of living to go down. That could decrease the property value of my house, and other adverse health risks could be associated with living close to that plant that's polluting. So that would be considered a negative externality. Now, the question is, when products that create positive externalities are produced, how does that impact the market equilibrium output? So anytime when there's a positive externality, and let me draw a graph to kind of highlight this. So if we have our market here, price and quantity, and so far we've just been looking at the private costs and the private benefits. So our demand curve, anytime there's a positive externality, we're just looking at the marginal private benefits. So that's of all the people who are consuming the goods or going out and purchasing it. And we see that we'll have an equilibrium. So maybe the equilibrium price is, let's just say, P naught here. And our equilibrium quantity. So anytime there's a positive externality, the market fails to take into account the marginal social benefit. So that's where we have this extra, or this other demand curve, which takes in the marginal social benefit. Anytime there's a positive externality, what tends to happen is that that good is underconsumed. So let's say this is going to be Q1. So something that provides like a positive benefit, such as the flu shot, as I mentioned earlier, as a society, we should want more people to consume that. But the reason why more people don't consume it is because the price is too high. But if the price were a little bit lower, that can cause more people to consume it. So that's where the government might step in and subsidize it. So get us to consume more at this lower price. So anytime there's a positive externality, as a society, once again, we want more people to consume that. And conversely, anytime there's a negative externality, such as like pollution, that means that all the costs aren't really being accounted for. So that means that the price is set too low. So hopefully this helps with you guys as you're preparing for exam one. If there's any questions, please let me know. And if you watch this video in its entirety, please shoot me an email and let me know so I can make sure to add a couple extra credit points on to your exam one grade. All right, good luck studying. And once again, let me know if you have any questions.